The alarm screamed through the orbital station, and Commander Isla Norton felt her heart drop. She had spent 15 years working at the Valari diplomatic outpost, and never once had she heard that particular sound. It was the invasion warning, the one they had installed decades ago as a formality. Never expecting to actually use it, "Commander, we have multiple hostile signatures entering the system," her assistant Vel said, his voice shaking. The young Valari's skin had turned pale blue, a sure sign of fear among her species. "It's the creche." Isla moved to the main display, her hands trembling as she pulled up the tactical view. What she saw made her stomach twist. Dozens of red markers flooded into Valari space, each one representing a creche warship. The creche dominion was known throughout the galaxy as a brutal empire, one that conquered and enslaved rather than traded or negotiated. They had destroyed countless civilizations, and now they were here. "How many ships?" Isla asked, though she already knew the answer would be bad. 73 capital ships, Commander. Twice that number in support vessels. Vel's fingers danced across his console. "They're heading straight for the homeworld." Isla closed her eyes for a moment. The Valari had maybe 6 defensive platforms and a handful of patrol ships. They were traders and diplomats, not warriors. Their entire philosophy was built on peaceful coexistence and mutual benefit. They had never needed a real military because they had always relied on treaties and alliances to keep them safe. "Send out the distress call," Isla ordered. "All frequencies, all allied species. Tell them we're under attack and need immediate assistance." Vel worked quickly, broadcasting their desperate plea across the sector. Isla watched the communication logs as their message reached the various species they had treaties with. She waited for responses, hoping that anyone would answer their call for help. The first reply came from the Tarkoni Republic. It was brief and cold. "We regret that we cannot commit forces at this time. The creche dominion is too powerful. We recommend immediate evacuation." The second response was from the Shell Collective. "Our thoughts are with you. We are sending medical supplies." One by one, the responses trickled in. Each one was a polite refusal or a token gesture that wouldn't stop a single creche ship. The species they had traded with for generations, the ones they had helped during famines and disasters, were abandoning them. Isla understood why. The creche were terrifying, and no one wanted to risk war with them. But understanding didn't make it hurt any less. "Commander, the creche fleet is beginning bombardment of the outer defense platforms," Vel reported. On the screen, Isla watched as green energy beams sliced through their defenses like they were made of paper. "Platform 3 is gone. Platform 5 is requesting permission to evacuate." "Granted," Isla said quietly. There was no point in wasting lives on a battle they couldn't win. "Tell all platforms to evacuate and retreat to the homeworld." She sat down heavily in her chair, feeling the weight of failure pressing on her shoulders. In a few hours, maybe a day at most, the creche would control their system. Then would come the occupation, the enslavement, the destruction of everything the Valari had built over thousands of years. She had failed her people. "Commander," Vel suddenly shouted, his voice filled with something that might have been hope. "We have another response. It's from Earth, the humans." Isla thought about what she knew of them. They were the newest species to join the Galactic Council, having only achieved faster-than-light travel about 30 years ago. Most of the older species considered them primitive and aggressive, a species that had barely stopped fighting among themselves. The Valari had always been kind to them, though, seeing potential in these energetic newcomers. "What do they say?" Isla asked. Vel read the message aloud. "Help is coming. Hold your position. Do not surrender. Signed Earth Defense Command," that was it. No details about what kind of help or when it would arrive. Isla felt a flicker of something in her chest. It wasn't much, but it was more than anyone else had offered. At least the humans cared enough to respond. "Send a reply," Isla said. "Thank them, and provide our current tactical situation." Across the vast distance of space, in a small patrol ship near the edge of human territory, Captain Jake Sullivan was having a very ordinary day. The Liberty was a scout vessel, nothing fancy, with a crew of just 12 people. Their job was to patrol the border sectors, check on remote stations, and basically make sure nothing interesting happened. Jake liked it that way. Boring was good when you were in space. "Captain, we're picking up a distress signal," said Lieutenant Peters, the communications officer. She was young, fresh out of the academy, and still got excited about every little thing. "It's from the Valari system," Jake frowned. The Valari were good people in his opinion. They had been among the first species to welcome humanity into the galactic community, without treating them like barbaric children. He had visited one of their trading stations once and found them to be honest, kind, and genuinely interested in human culture. "Put it through," he said. The message played, and Jake's expression darkened as he listened. An invasion. The Kresh Dominion. He had read the briefings about the Kresh. They were bad news, the kind of species that gave the rest of the galaxy nightmares, and now they were attacking the Volari, who couldn't defend themselves against a determined child, much less a fleet of warships. "Sir, what do we do?" Peters asked. Jake didn't hesitate. "Send this to Earth Command immediately. Highest priority. Then respond to the Volari and tell them help is on the way." "Sir, we're just a patrol ship," Lieutenant Kowalski, his tactical officer, pointed out. "Even if we went there right now, we couldn't do anything against a Kresh fleet." "I know that," Jake said. "But someone needs to go, and we're the closest human ship. Send the message." Peters composed the response and sent it off. Jake knew his message had been vague, but he meant every word. Help was coming. He just hoped Earth Command would see it the same way. At Earth Defense Command headquarters in Geneva, Admiral Helen Carter was reviewing supply reports when the priority alert flashed across her screen. She opened it immediately, years of military experience telling her that priority alerts were never good news. She read Jake Sullivan's report twice, then pulled up everything they had on the Volari system and the Kresh Dominion. The picture that emerged was grim. The Volari were peaceful traders with virtually no military capability. The Kresh were a heavily militarized empire with a history of conquest and brutality. If the Kresh took the Volari system, it would be a massacre. Helen stood up and walked to the window of her office, looking out over the city. Humanity had been part of the galactic community for 3 decades now, but they were still the new kids on the block. Most species saw them as violent and primitive, barely civilized enough to be allowed into polite society. Humans had worked hard to build relationships and prove they could be trusted. The Volari had been one of their first real friends out there among the stars. They had offered fair trade deals when others had tried to cheat the inexperienced humans. They had voted to support human membership in the Galactic Council when others had opposed it. They had treated humanity with respect and kindness, and now they were dying and no one was helping them. Helen made her decision. She opened a communication channel to the Joint Chiefs and the President. This was going to require approval from the very top, but she already knew what she was going to recommend. "We need to activate Protocol Omega," she said when they were all connected. "Full Third Fleet deployment." There was a moment of silence. Protocol Omega was the full mobilization code, the one they used when Earth itself was threatened. The Third Fleet represented a massive portion of humanity's military strength, over 300 warships. "Admiral, the Volari system is not part of human territory," General Brooks pointed out. "We have no treaty obligation to defend them." "No, we don't," Helen agreed. "But they asked for help and they're our friends. More importantly, if we let the Kresh take that system without opposition, we send a message to every predator species in the galaxy that our friends are easy targets. We show weakness." "And if we send the entire Third Fleet?" President Walsh asked. "Then we send a different message," Helen said firmly. "We show the galaxy that when you attack humanity's friends, you don't face a token response. You face total war. We make it clear that there are consequences for aggression." The discussion continued for 20 minutes, but Helen could tell she was winning. The president understood the strategic implications. If humanity rolled over now, if they abandoned an ally, they would be seen as weak and unreliable. Every species in the galaxy would learn that human friendship meant nothing when tested. Finally, President Walsh gave the order. "Activate Protocol Omega. Deploy the Third Fleet to Volari space. Rules of engagement are defensive protection of Volari assets and citizens." "Admiral Carter, you have operational command." Helen felt a surge of satisfaction. "Understood, sir. We'll show them what humanity means by helping a friend." She immediately began issuing orders. Fleet captains were alerted. Ships began moving to rally points. Supply chains activated. Within hours, the largest human fleet ever assembled for a foreign deployment was preparing to launch. Back on the Liberty, Jake Sullivan received confirmation from Earth. Commander Isla Norton stood on the observation deck of the orbital station, watching her homeworld below as explosions lit up the night side. The Kresh had been methodical in their attack, destroying the defense platforms first, then beginning their assault on population centers. They wanted to break the Volari spirit, to make surrender seem like the only option. "Commander, we received a response from Earth Command," Vel said, rushing up to her with a datapad. "They confirmed that help is on the way." Isla took the datapad and read the brief message. It was vague about details, but firm in its promise. Help was coming. She wanted to believe it, but what could the humans realistically send? They were a young species with limited resources spread across their own territory. Maybe a medical ship to help evacuate civilians. Perhaps a frigate or two as a symbolic gesture. It would be something at least which was more than anyone else had offered. "How long until they arrive?" she asked. "They didn't specify," Vel said. "But the message said to hold our position and not surrender under any circumstances." Isla looked back at her homeworld. Already, millions of Volari were fleeing the cities trying to reach the countryside where the Kresh bombardment was less concentrated. Her people were dying, and she was supposed to just wait for help that might never come or might arrive too late. "Send a message to all Volari ships and stations," she said quietly. "We hold, we don't surrender. If we must die, we die free." Across the galaxy and the massive shipyards orbiting Mars, organized chaos had erupted. Admiral Helen Carter had relocated her command to the fleet carrier Defiant, the flagship of the Third Fleet. Around her, 300 warships were preparing for immediate deployment. It was the largest single fleet movement in human history. "Admiral, the 6th Carrier Group reports ready for departure," reported Commander Lisa Hayes, her Chief of Staff. "That's the last one. All fleet elements are now at full readiness." Helen studied the tactical display showing the assembled fleet. 6 carrier groups formed the core, each centered around a massive carrier packed with fighter craft. Surrounding them were battleships, cruisers, destroyers, frigates, and support vessels. The newest additions were 3 Dreadnought-class ships so new that their existence was still classified. The galaxy had no idea humanity had built something so powerful. "How long to reach Volari space?" Helen asked. 72 hours at maximum hyperspace speed," the navigation officer replied. "We could push it to 60 hours, but that would stress the engines." 72 hours it is, Helen decided. "I want the fleet arriving in fighting condition, not limping in with engine trouble." "Send the order. All ships jump in 15 minutes. She opened a channel to the entire fleet. Over 30,000 personnel on 300 ships heard her voice. "This is Admiral Carter. In a few minutes, we're going to jump to the Volari system. Our mission is simple. Protect our allies and destroy any force that threatens them. The Kresh Dominion thinks they can attack peaceful species without consequence. We're going to teach them otherwise. Remember your training. Trust your shipmates and show the galaxy what humanity stands for." Carter out. Lieutenant Commander Greg Hayes sat at his tactical station aboard the destroyer Relentless, reviewing everything they knew about Kresh military capabilities. It wasn't much. The Kresh rarely left survivors, and most species fled rather than fought them. What information they had suggested the Kresh relied on heavy shields and overwhelming firepower. Tactics that had worked well against the lightly armed species they typically targeted. "What do you think, Greg?" asked Captain Morrison, the Relentless's commanding officer. "Can we take them?" Greg looked up from his screen. "Their ships are big and powerful, sir. But their tactics are straightforward. They just park in orbit and bombard until their enemy surrenders. They haven't faced an opponent who could actually fight back in decades, maybe longer." "And we can fight back," Morrison said with a grim smile. "Yes, sir. Our ships are faster, our weapons have better range, and our tactical doctrine is about 300 years more advanced than theirs. On paper, we should dominate them." "On paper," Morrison repeated. "Let's hope reality agrees with paper." In the hangar bay of the carrier Valiant, pilot Maya Chen was conducting her pre-flight check on her fighter. The F-78 Raptor was humanity's newest space superiority fighter, sleek and deadly. She had trained for 2 years to fly it, and now she would get to test it in real combat. "Hey Maya, you nervous?" asked Lieutenant Ross Bennett, her wingmate. He was checking his own fighter 2 berths over. "Terrified," Maya admitted, "but also excited." "Does that make me crazy?" "Probably," Ross said with a laugh. "But we're fighter pilots. We're all a little crazy." Their squadron commander, Major Kelly Price, approached with a datapad. "All right, listen up. We're going to be dropping into a hot zone. The Kresh have 70-plus capital ships and probably twice that in fighters. Our job is to clear a path for the big ships and protect them from enemy fighters. Stay in formation, watch your wingmate, and don't try to be a hero." What if I'm naturally heroic? Ross asked. Then die naturally somewhere else, Kelly said without humor. I want all of you coming home. We clear? Yes, ma'am. The squadron replied in unison. Maya finished her checks and climbed into her cockpit. The fighter hummed to life around her, systems initializing one by one. She had trained for this moment, dreamed about it even, but now that it was here, the reality was sobering. In a few hours, she would be in combat against an enemy that had destroyed civilizations. People would die. Maybe her, maybe Ross, maybe all of them. She pushed the thought away and focused on her breathing. Fear was natural. What mattered was what you did with it. Back in Valari space, the Liberty continued its reconnaissance mission. Captain Jake Sullivan had positioned his small patrol ship at the edge of the system, far enough from the Kresh fleet to avoid detection, but close enough to monitor their movements. They're spreading out, Lieutenant Kowalski reported from the tactical station. Looks like they're preparing for orbital occupation of the major population centers. Jake watched the Kresh formations on his screen. They moved with the confidence of a force that had never faced real opposition. Their ships were arrayed in a standard occupation pattern, focused on controlling the planet rather than defending against attack. They're not expecting anyone to challenge them, Jake observed. No defensive pickets, no advanced scouts. They think this is already over. To be fair, sir, for the Valari, it kind of is, Peters said quietly. Their last defense platform just went offline. They've got nothing left to fight with, Jake nodded. It was true. The Valari had held out for 2 days, but their resistance was crumbling. If help didn't arrive soon, there would be nothing left to save. He checked the countdown timer on his console. 58 hours until the Third Fleet arrived. The Valari just had to survive until then. Sir, we're receiving a tight beam communication from the Valari station, Peters said. It's Commander Norton. She's asking for an update on human assistance. Jake considered his response carefully. He couldn't tell Norton about the full fleet deployment, not on an open channel that the Kresh might intercept. But he needed to give her something to hold on to. Tell her that help is substantial and will arrive within 3 days, Jake said. Tell her Earth has not forgotten its friends. On the Valari station, Isla received Jake's message and felt tears stinging her eyes. 3 days. They had to survive 3 days. Around her, the station was crowded with refugees from the destroyed platforms. Food was running low. Power was being rationed. The Kresh ships were getting closer every hour. Can we last 3 days? Fel asked. We have to, Isla said. Pass the word to all Valari channels. Help is coming in 3 days. Tell everyone to hold on, to hide, to survive. Just 3 more days. Aboard the Defiant, Admiral Helen Carter was meeting with her senior officers via holographic conference. The faces of 30 ship captains floated in the air around her command chair. Current status of the Valari defense? She asked. Collapsed, reported Captain Hughes of the intelligence ship Watchtower. The last defense platform fell 6 hours ago. The Kresh are beginning ground operations on the major continents. Estimated civilian casualties are already in the millions. Helen's jaw tightened. Every hour they spent in hyperspace was another hour the Valari suffered. But there was no way to go faster without damaging their ships. When we arrive, I want maximum shock effect, she said. We're going to jump in right on top of them. All 300 ships at once. I want the Kresh to have exactly 0 seconds to prepare for what's about to hit them. Admiral, what are our rules of engagement? Asked Captain Singh of the battleship Thunderhead. Do we offer them a chance to surrender? Helen was quiet for a moment. She thought about the millions of Valari who had already died, about the species throughout the galaxy who had turned away when the Valari called for help, about the message humanity needed to send. We'll give them one warning, she said finally, one chance to withdraw peacefully. If they refuse, we destroy them completely. No half measures. The galaxy needs to see that attacking our friends has consequences. Understood, Admiral, Singh said, and the other captains nodded in agreement. Lieutenant Commander Greg Hayes was in the Relentless's briefing room. The Kresh war leader Calthar stood on the bridge of his flagship, the Bloodied Claw, watching the final stages of the Valari conquest unfold. It had been almost too easy. The Valari had put up a token resistance with their pathetic defense platforms, but those had been swept aside in hours. Now his forces controlled the orbital space, and ground troops were securing the major population centers. War leader, the northern continent has surrendered, reported his second-in-command. They are requesting terms. Calthar made a dismissive gesture with his clawed hand. There are no terms. Enslave the workers, eliminate the rest. Standard protocol. This was his 37th conquest. Each one followed the same pattern. Overwhelming force, brutal efficiency, and absolute dominance. The Kresh Dominion had perfected this approach over centuries. Other species feared them, and rightfully so. Fear was the foundation of power. War leader, our sensors are detecting unusual hyperspace fluctuations at the system's edge, the sensor operator called out. Calthar turned his attention to the tactical display. Probably refugees fleeing the system, or perhaps one of the other species sending a single ship to observe the conquest. Let them watch. Let them see what happened to those who were too weak to defend themselves. How many ships? He asked casually. The sensor operator was silent for a moment, his expression confused. War leader, the readings are inconsistent. It appears to be a significant spatial distortion. Clarify, Calthar demanded, a hint of irritation in his voice. Multiple hyperspace signatures, war leader. Many multiple. I'm reading. This cannot be correct. Calthar walked over to the sensor station and looked at the display himself. His eyes widened. The readings showed dozens of hyperspace exit points forming simultaneously. Not refugees. A fleet. Sound battle stations, he ordered, his voice sharp. All ships to defensive formation. Identify those vessels immediately. Throughout the Kresh fleet, alarms blared. Ships that had been spread out for occupation duty began scrambling to form defensive lines. Weapon systems powered up. Shields strengthened. In the span of 2 minutes, the Kresh transformed from an occupation force into a battle fleet. On the Valari station, Commander Isla Norton was in her quarters, trying to sleep despite the constant sounds of explosions from the planet below. When the alarm sounded, she jolted awake, her heart racing. Had the Kresh decided to destroy the station? Were these her final moments? She rushed to the command center, where Vel was staring at the sensor displays with an expression of complete shock. Commander, you need to see this, he said, his voice barely a whisper. Isla looked at the screen and felt her breath catch in her throat. The edge of the system was lighting up like a star-going nova. Hyperspace windows were opening one after another, and from each one emerged a ship. Human ships. Dozens of them. Hundreds of them, how many? She managed to ask. I've counted 287 so far, Vel said, and more are still arriving. Isla sank into her chair, unable to process what she was seeing. She had expected maybe a frigate or two, a token force to help evacuate civilians. She had never imagined this. No one had. The humans had sent an entire fleet bigger than anything the Valari had ever seen. They really came, she whispered. They actually came. Aboard the Liberty, Captain Jake Sullivan was watching the same spectacle on his much smaller display. He had known the Third Fleet was coming, but seeing it materialize was something else entirely. Ship after ship appeared, falling into formation with practiced precision. It was beautiful and terrifying at the same time. Sir, we're receiving a communication from the Defiant, Lieutenant Peters said. Admiral Carter is requesting our reconnaissance data. Send everything we have, Jake ordered. Current Kresh positions, ship classifications, everything. Let's make sure the Admiral has the complete picture. The data streamed from the Liberty to the flagship. Jake watched the fleet continue to form up. A perfect wall of human military power. The Kresh had to be losing their minds right now. On the bloodied claw, war leader Calthar was indeed struggling to understand what he was seeing. The sensor displays showed a human fleet of staggering size. 300 warships had just appeared in his territory, and they were arranging themselves in attack formations. What are the humans doing here? He demanded. They have no stake in this system. Unknown, war leader, his second-in-command replied. But they are powering weapons and advancing on our position. Calthar studied the tactical display. The human fleet outnumbered his own 4-1, but numbers weren't everything. The Kresh had won against superior numbers before. Humans were young, untested. They had barely stopped fighting among themselves. They couldn't possibly have the experience or discipline to challenge the Dominion. They're bluffing, Calthar decided. This is a show of force, nothing more. They want us to run so they can claim victory without fighting. Maintain position. I want a firing solution on their flagship. Aboard the Defiant, Admiral Helen Carter sat in her command chair, watching the Kresh fleet on the main display. They had stopped their bombardment of the planet and formed a defensive line, but they hadn't retreated. Good. She had been prepared to chase them across the sector if necessary. Admiral, We have complete tactical data from Captain Sullivan, Commander Hayes reported. The Kresh have 73 capital ships and approximately 150 support vessels. Their flagship is the large cruiser in the center of their formation. Helen studied the information. The Kresh had arranged themselves in a traditional battle line, shields forward, weapons ready. It was a defensive formation designed to maximize their firepower. Against most opponents, it would have been effective. Against the Third Fleet, it was suicide. Open a channel to the Kresh flagship, Helen ordered. All frequencies. A moment later, the communications officer nodded. Channel open, Admiral. Helen spoke clearly and firmly. This is Admiral Helen Carter of the Earth Defense Force. You have entered Valari space and attacked our allies without provocation. You have 30 seconds to withdraw from this system. This is your only warning. After 30 seconds, we will open fire and destroy any Kresh vessel that remains. You have been warned. She closed the channel and waited. Around her, the bridge crew sat in tense silence. Helen counted down the seconds in her head. 30, 29, 28. On the bloodied claw, Calthar listened to the human's ultimatum and laughed. 30 seconds? These children thought they could order the Kresh Dominion around? They thought their fancy fleet could frighten warriors who had conquered half the sector. Ignore them, he ordered. Prepare to fire on my command. We'll destroy their flagship first and show them what happens to species who interfere in Kresh business. 15 seconds. 14. 13. Helen's countdown reached 0. The Kresh hadn't moved. They had made their choice. All ships, she said calmly. Execute attack pattern Alpha. Fire at will. The Third Fleet opened fire as one. 300 warships unleashed their weapons simultaneously. Railgun rounds crossed the distance between the fleets at a fraction of light speed. Missile batteries launched thousands of seeking warheads. Energy weapons blazed across the void. The sheer volume of fire was overwhelming, a wall of destruction that no shield could hope to withstand. The Kresh fleet's shields flared bright as they absorbed the initial impacts. Then they began to fail. Railgun rounds punched through weakened shields and tore into hull plating. Missiles detonated in brilliant flashes. Energy beams cut through armor like a hot knife through butter. In the first 10 seconds, 6 Kresh capital ships were destroyed. In the next 10 seconds, 12 more joined them. On the bloodied claw, Calthar grabbed his command chair as the ship rocked from multiple impacts. Warning alarms screamed throughout the bridge. Damage reports flooded in faster than anyone could process them. Return fire, he roared. All batteries, fire everything. The Kresh fleet responded, their own weapons blazing. Green energy beams lanced out toward the human ships. Plasma missiles streaked across space. For a moment, it seemed like the Kresh might hurt the humans, might make them pay for their arrogance. Then the human point defense systems activated. Automated tracking systems locked onto every incoming projectile. Defensive lasers fired in rapid succession, detonating missiles long before they reached their targets. Energy shields absorbed the few beam weapons that made it through. Of the hundreds of shots the Kresh fired in that first exchange, fewer than 10 actually hit human ships, and the damage was minimal. This isn't possible, Calthar whispered, watching his fleet being torn apart. Lieutenant Commander Greg Hayes was managing the Relentless's weapons with practiced efficiency. His screen showed target priorities, firing solutions, and damage assessments updated in real time. Railgun batteries 1 through 4. Target that cruiser at coordinate 739er, he ordered. Fire when ready. The Relentless shuddered slightly as its main guns fired. 4 hypersonic rounds crossed the distance and slammed into the Kresh cruiser's weakened shields. The shield collapsed and the remaining rounds tore through the ship's hull, ripping it apart from the inside. Target destroyed, reported the weapons officer. Moving to next target. Make it the destroyer at coordinates 552, Greg said. And have... The battle had been raging for 3 hours and the Kresh fleet was dying. What had started as 73 capital ships was now down to 32, and those that remained were burning, limping, or desperately trying to escape. The human Third Fleet moved through the battlefield like a force of nature, methodical and unstoppable. Lieutenant Commander Greg Hayes watched his tactical displays with grim satisfaction. The Relentless had personally destroyed 4 Kresh cruisers and assisted in taking down 2 more. Their railguns were running hot, but the weapon crews kept them firing with impressive efficiency. Enemy battleship at coordinates 927 is attempting to break, Through the perimeter, his weapons officer reported. Greg pulled up the tactical view. The Kresh battleship was damaged but still dangerous, its engines burning hard as it tried to reach the hyperspace jump point. It was leaving its own damaged ships behind, abandoning them to save itself. That's not happening, Greg said. Helm, intercept course. Engineering, I need maximum acceleration. Weapons, prepare the plasma torpedoes. The Relentless surged forward, its powerful engines pushing the ship to its limits. Around them, 2 more human destroyers joined the pursuit, forming a hunting pack. The Kresh battleship saw them coming and tried to bring its rear weapons to bear. But it was too slow and too damaged. Firing solution locked, the weapons officer announced. Fire all torpedoes, Greg ordered. 6 plasma torpedoes launched from the Relentless, followed by salvos from the other 2 destroyers. The torpedoes were humanity's newest weapon, using contained fusion reactions to generate devastating explosions. The Kresh had never seen anything like them. The torpedoes struck the battleship's weakened rear shields and detonated. The fusion reactions created miniature suns that overwhelmed the shields and vaporized the ship's engines. The battleship went dark, drifting in space, dead and helpless. Target neutralized, Greg reported. Moving to next priority target. In space above the Valari homeworld, pilot Maya Chen was chasing down the last squadron of Kresh fighters. Her own fighters' weapons were nearly depleted, but she had enough left to finish this fight. The Kresh pilots had finally abandoned their rigid formations and were simply trying to survive. But it was too late for that. Hawk 3, I've got the 2 on the left, Maya called to Ross. You take the 3 on the right. Copy that, Hawk 2, Ross replied. His fighter banked hard and dove after his targets. Maya lined up her shot carefully. The Kresh fighters were zigzagging now, trying to be unpredictable, but her training and instincts gave her an edge. She fired a burst from her cannons and the lead fighter exploded. The second one tried to dive away, but she followed it down and finished it with her last missile. Hawk 3, status. She called. 2 down, 1 got away, Ross reported. That last guy is pretty good. Want help? Maya offered. Nah, I've got this, Ross said. She could hear the grin in his voice. There he is, lining up the shot and splash 1 more. That's all of them in this sector. Maya checked her tactical display. Ross was right. The space around them was clear of enemy fighters. Across the entire battlefield, Kresh fighter resistance had collapsed. Human pilots had achieved complete air superiority in less than 2 hours. All Hawk Squadron reform on me, Major Price ordered. We're going to escort the bombers in for their attack run on the Kresh ground positions. Maya brought her fighter around and joined the formation. Below them, the Valari homeworld was scarred by bombardment, but the planet was still there, still alive. Thanks to the human fleet's arrival, it would stay that way. On the surface of the Valari homeworld, in a shelter beneath the capital city, millions of civilians had been listening to the sounds of battle overhead. The Kresh bombardment had been constant for days, a terrifying rhythm of destruction. But then it had stopped suddenly, replaced by different sounds. Explosions, yes, but farther away. Weapon fire that didn't impact the ground. A young Valari named Tira huddled with her family, her mother holding her close. What's happening? She whispered. I don't know, little one, her mother replied. But I think someone is fighting the Kresh. The shelter's emergency radio crackled to life. Commander Norton's voice, tired but filled with emotion, came through the speakers. People of Valari, this is Commander Norton from the orbital station. I want you to know that help has arrived. The humans have sent a fleet, a massive fleet, and they are defeating the Kresh as we speak. Hold on, stay strong. We are going to survive this. The shelter erupted in cheers and tears. Tira looked up at her mother, seeing hope on her face for the first time in days. The humans came? She asked. They really came? Yes, little one, her mother said, hugging her tighter. They came. Aboard the Defiant, Admiral Helen Carter was coordinating the final stages of the battle. The Kresh fleet was broken, but there were still ground forces on the planet that needed to be dealt with. She had already deployed Marine battalions to support Valari security forces, and bomber wings were preparing to strike Kresh positions. Admiral, we have multiple Kresh ships requesting permission to surrender, Commander Hayes reported. Helen considered for a moment. The Kresh had shown no mercy to the Valari or countless other species they had conquered. Part of her wanted to refuse to destroy every last one of them, but humanity couldn't claim the moral high ground if they acted like the monsters they were fighting. Accepted, she said, but I want them disarmed completely. Strip their weapons, their shields, everything. They surrender as helpless hulks or they don't surrender at all. Understood, Admiral. I'll relay the terms. Over the next hour, 18 Kresh ships surrendered under those conditions. Human boarding parties took control of the vessels, removed their crews to holding areas, and systematically stripped every weapon and system that could make them a threat. The remaining Kresh ships that refused to surrender were hunted down and destroyed. Captain Jake Sullivan, still watching from the Liberty, couldn't quite believe what he was seeing. When he had sent that first distress call to Earth Command, he had hoped for maybe a cruiser squadron. Instead, Earth had sent the full might of its military, and that military had just crushed one of the most feared forces in the galaxy. "Sir, Admiral Carter is hailing us," Lieutenant Peters said. Jake straightened his uniform. "Put her through." Admiral Carter's face appeared on the screen. She looked tired but satisfied. "Captain Sullivan, your reconnaissance data was instrumental in our battle plan." "Well done." "Thank you, Admiral," Jake replied. "I just wish we could have done more." "You did exactly what you needed to do," Helen said. "You were the first to respond, the first to show the Valari they weren't alone. Sometimes that matters more than firepower. I'm recommending you for a commendation." After the call ended, Jake sat back in his chair and allowed himself a moment of pride. His little patrol ship hadn't fired a single shot, but they had played their part in something historic. Lieutenant Commander Greg Hayes was helping coordinate the cleanup operations when a priority alert flashed on his screen. Several Kresh ground installations were activating planetary defense weapons, preparing to fire on human ships. "Tactical to all ships," he broadcast. "We have hostile ground installations powering up. Coordinates being transmitted now. Recommend immediate strike." High above the planet, bomber squadrons received the coordinates and moved into position. Maya Chen and her fighter squadron provided escort as the bombers made their attack runs. Precision strikes took out the Kresh installations before they could fire a single shot. On the ground, Kresh commanders realized their situation was hopeless. Their fleet was gone. Their air support was destroyed. Human Marines were landing in force, supported by Valari security forces who were more than ready to take revenge on their occupiers. Over the next few hours, Kresh ground forces began surrendering en masse. Commander Isla Norton stood on the observation deck of the orbital station, watching human ships patrol the space around her homeworld. Engineering vessels were already moving to help repair damaged orbital infrastructure. Medical ships were broadcasting offers of assistance to treat wounded on the surface. Vel approached her with a datapad. "Commander, Admiral Carter is requesting a meeting. She wants to discuss long-term security arrangements for the system." Isla nodded, still somewhat dazed by everything that had happened. "Of course. Tell her I'll meet her whenever she's available." She looked back at the fleet. 300 warships sent across the galaxy to protect a species that most of the galaxy had written off. It was unprecedented. It was overwhelming. It was the most beautiful thing she had ever seen. An hour later, Isla was aboard the Defiant, sitting across a conference table from Admiral Carter. The human admiral looked every bit the warrior, with sharp eyes that missed nothing and an air of quiet authority. "Commander Norton, on behalf of Humanity and Earth Defense Command, I want to apologize that we didn't arrive sooner," Helen said. Isla felt tears threatening again. "Apologize? Admiral, you saved us. You came when no one else would. You brought a fleet beyond anything we imagined. My people owe you everything." "You owe us nothing," Helen replied firmly. "The Valari have been good friends to humanity. When we needed allies, you welcomed us. When others dismissed us, you treated us with respect. That means something." 3 weeks had passed since the battle, and the Valari system was transforming. Human ships still filled the orbital space, but now they were construction vessels and supply transports instead of warships. The massive Third Fleet had departed, leaving behind a smaller defense force to ensure the Kresh didn't try anything stupid. Around the planet, human engineers worked alongside Valari crews to rebuild what had been destroyed. Commander Isla Norton walked through the rebuilt sections of the orbital station, marveling at how quickly the repairs had progressed. Human efficiency was impressive. What she had estimated would take months had been accomplished in weeks. She was heading to a special ceremony, one that the Valari government had been planning since the day of their liberation. In the station's main auditorium, hundreds of Valari had gathered. At the front of the room stood Admiral Helen Carter, Captain Jake Sullivan, Lieutenant Commander Greg Hayes, pilot Maya Chen, and several other key members of the human forces that had saved them. The Volari Prime Minister, Elder Soren, stood at the podium. 3 weeks ago we faced extinction, Soren began, his voice carrying through the hall. The Kresh Dominion attacked us without warning, without mercy. We called for help, and the galaxy turned away. All except one species. Humanity answered. Our call not with words or token gestures, but with 300 warships and 30,000 personnel willing to risk everything for people they barely knew. The Volari in the audience murmured in agreement. Every person in that room had been affected by the Kresh attack. Everyone had lost someone or something, and everyone remembered the moment when human ships had appeared and turned certain death into impossible victory. Today we honor those who saved us, Soren continued. Admiral Carter, would you please step forward? Helen walked to the podium, and Soren placed a crystalline medal around her neck. It was the Star of Volari, the highest honor their civilization could bestow. For extraordinary courage and leadership in the defense of the Volari people, Soren announced. We name you Defender of Volari and friend to all our people. Helen accepted the honor with quiet dignity. Prime Minister, I speak for all of humanity when I say we are honored to call the Volari our friends. What we did, we would do again without hesitation. That's what friends do. One by one, the other humans were called forward and honored. Jake Sullivan received a medal for being the first to respond, Maya Chen for her actions in the fighter battles, Greg Hayes for his tactical brilliance. Each time, the Volari audience erupted in applause and cheers. When the ceremony ended, Isla found Helen standing near a viewing port, looking out at the planet below. The human admiral had a contemplative expression on her face. Penny for your thoughts? Isla asked, using a human phrase she had learned. Helen smiled slightly. Just thinking about what happens next. This was a victory, but it's also a beginning. The galaxy is watching now. What we do in the coming months will shape humanity's place in the galactic community for generations. You're worried about consequences, Isla observed. Cautious about them, Helen corrected. We sent a message when we came here. We told the galaxy that attacking peaceful species has consequences, that humanity will defend its friends with overwhelming force. That's good, but it also means we're going to be tested. Other aggressive species will want to see if we're bluffing, if we'll really commit our military every time someone calls for help. Isla nodded slowly. And will you? Helen was quiet for a moment. That depends on the situation. We can't be everywhere at once and we can't save everyone. But when we give our word, when we form an alliance, we keep it. The Volari learned that. Others will too. Across the galaxy, in the chambers of the Galactic Council, the emergency session was in its third hour. Representatives from 200 species filled the hall, and every one of them was talking about the same thing, humanity and the Volari situation. The Tarkoni ambassador, whose government had refused the Volari's call for help, was speaking. The human response was disproportionate and dangerous. They deployed a massive military force outside their own territory. This sets a troubling precedent. The Shell representative nodded in agreement. We must consider the destabilizing effect this has on the balance of power. One species cannot simply deploy such overwhelming force whenever they choose. From the human delegation, Ambassador Claire Johnson stood to respond. She was a career diplomat who had spent the last 10 years building relationships within the Council. Now those relationships would be tested. Let me be very clear, Claire said, her voice calm but firm. The Volari are our allies. When they called for help, we answered. Other members of this council received that same call and chose to do nothing. You're right that our response was overwhelming, but that was intentional. The Kresh Dominion has terrorized peaceful species for centuries because no one has been willing to stop them. We stopped them. You destroyed an entire Kresh fleet, the Tarkoni ambassador protested. That's not defense, that's aggression. The Kresh attacked our allies, Claire responded. They bombarded civilian populations. They killed millions of innocents. We gave them a chance to withdraw peacefully. They refused. Everything that happened after that was a consequence of their choices, not ours. The council chamber erupted in argument. Some species supported humanity's actions. Others condemned them as dangerous overreach. But one thing was clear. No one could ignore humanity anymore. The young species that had barely been admitted to the council 30 years ago had just demonstrated military power that rivaled the greatest empires. In a dark chamber many light years away, the Kresh High Command met in emergency session. The Supreme Leader, ancient and scarred from 1,000 battles, listened to the reports from survivors of the Valari battle. 300 ships, he repeated slowly. The humans deployed 300 warships for one minor system? Yes, Supreme Leader, the War Admiral replied. Our forces were completely destroyed. The few ships that surrendered have been returned to us, but they're stripped of all weapons and systems. They're barely more than hulks. The Supreme Leader studied a holographic recording of the battle. He watched human ships move with precision and coordination that spoke of centuries of military development. He watched their weapons tear through Kresh shields that had turned aside the attacks of countless other species. He watched an entire fleet, ships and warriors that had conquered dozens of worlds, being destroyed in mere hours. Analysis, he demanded. Human military doctrine is far more advanced than we anticipated, the War Admiral said. Their tactics, their weapons, their coordination, all of it suggests a species that has specialized in warfare to a degree we've never seen. They don't just have a military, they have a war culture. The Supreme Leader was silent for a long time. Finally, he spoke. Declare the human sphere of influence off limits. Any species under their protection is not to be touched. Spread the word throughout the Dominion. Humanity has proven they are not prey. We will not make the mistake of challenging them again. It was a bitter admission, but the Supreme Leader had survived for so long by knowing when to fight and when to retreat. The humans had sent a message with the destruction of the Valari fleet. The Kresh had received it loud and clear. Back in the Valari system, young Tira was attending school for the first time since the attack. Her school had been damaged by Kresh bombardment, but human engineers had helped rebuild it in record time. Now, standing in front of her class, she was giving a presentation about the humans who had saved them. The humans came even though they didn't have to, Tira explained to her classmates, displaying images of the Third Fleet. When everyone else said no, they said yes. My teacher says that's because humans believe in helping their friends no matter what. Her teacher, an older Valari named Mira, nodded approvingly. That's right, Tira. The humans taught us something important. Real friendship isn't just about good times. It's about being there when things are hard. One of the students raised their hand. Teacher, why did the humans send so many ships? Couldn't they have just sent a few? Mira considered the question. I asked a human engineer that same thing. He told me that humans have a saying, go big or stay home. When humans commit to something, they commit completely. They don't do things halfway. Later that day, pilot Maya Chen was conducting a routine patrol of the Valari system when her communications officer spoke up. Lieutenant, we're receiving a message from the surface. It's from a school. They're asking if you'd be willing to talk to their students. Maya smiled. She had received dozens of such requests over the past few weeks. The Valari, especially the young ones, were fascinated by the humans who had saved them. Tell them I'd be happy to. Schedule it for tomorrow afternoon if possible. The next day, Maya found herself speaking to a classroom full of eager young Valari via video link. They asked her questions about flying fighters, about the battle, about Earth. She answered as best she could, trying to give them honest answers while keeping things appropriate for children. Do you think the Kresh will come back? One young Valari asked nervously. Maya shook her head. No, I don't. We sent them a message they won't forget. But even if they did try, you wouldn't be alone. Humanity stands with the Valari now, that's a promise we keep.